My son-in-law raised his glass over my crying daughter's head and said, "Well, Madison, at least you were a good investment while you lasted." His father laughed and clapped him on the shoulder like it was the funniest thing he had heard all year. I watched my girl fold in on herself at that table, and something very old and very cold woke up inside me. If you were sitting where I was, watching your only child be humiliated while two smug men celebrated, what would you do? Before you decide I went too far, read to the end and tell me honestly, did I have any other choice? My name is Daniel Hart. I am 68 years old, a retired structural engineer from Cincinnati, Ohio, widower, father of one daughter named Madison, and grandfather to a little boy who still thinks I can fix anything with my hands. For 40 years I designed bridges and office towers that still stand over this country. For the last 8 after my wife Linda died, I've mostly lived quietly in a modest house on the edge of town, tending my tomatoes and repairing neighbors' fences for free. But I did one thing that was not quiet. I used my retirement savings, every careful dollar, to help my daughter and her husband buy into his family's business, a chain of high-end kitchen showrooms and remodeling services owned by the Brooks family. I believed I was investing in my daughter's future. I did not know I was buying front-row tickets to her humiliation. Madison met Ethan Brooks in college. He was smooth, ambitious, the youngest of 3 sons of Charles Brooks, who had built his company from a single cabinet shop into a regional brand. They married when Madison was 25. Linda and I were proud. Charles was charming at the wedding, white teeth, firm handshake, the kind of man who never takes off his watch in case someone asks the time, and he can show off what it cost. The first red flag came when Ethan and Madison wanted to buy into the family company. "It's a golden opportunity, Dad," Madison said, sitting at my kitchen table with the brochure Charles had given her. "Dad, they're letting us buy 10% at a discount. It's like being handed a future." Ethan sat beside her, fingers laced over hers, his smile carefully humble. "I know it's a big ask, Mr. Hart, but with your help on the down payment, we could secure our stake. We're talking equity, real ownership, security for Maddie and the baby when we start a family." I'd always been cautious with money, but the thought of my daughter having a piece of something solid appealed to the engineer in me. I did my homework. I asked for financial statements, and to my surprise, Charles sent them. The company looked healthy enough, modest debt, consistent profit. Still, I did one thing right that day. "Before I sign anything," I told Ethan and Madison, "my lawyer will look at the agreement." Ethan's smile flickered, just for a second. "Of course. That's smart. My dad just uses a standard shareholder contract, but feel free." Charles wasn't as pleased. When we met in his glass-walled office overlooking the largest showroom, he waved a manicured hand at the papers. "Daniel, I've done this 100 times with my own boys. You don't need a lawyer for a simple family agreement." "I do," I said. "I don't sign structural drawings without another set of eyes either." His jaw clenched so briefly I almost missed it. But he nodded. In the end, my lawyer, old Ben Fisher, made one significant change. Instead of gifting the money outright, he structured it as a secured loan from me to Madison personally, with her shares in the company pledged as collateral. If the company failed or she was pushed out, the shares would revert to me until the loan was settled. "Why so complicated?" Madison had asked, frowning over the paperwork. "Because life gets complicated," Ben said gently. "This way, your father is protected, and so are you. If things go sideways, the Brooks family cannot strip you of everything your father paid for without dealing with him." She signed anyway, trusting me. Ethan signed as witness. Charles signed the company documents, his pen strokes hard and impatient. And for a while, things were fine. Madison threw herself into the business. She had always had an eye for design, and soon clients were asking for her by name. The local magazine did a piece on the new face of Brooks Kitchens. There was a photo of Madison in a navy blazer standing in front of a wall of polished white cabinets smiling like the future was already here. Ethan, meanwhile, moved into a strategic operations role, which from what I could see meant he took long lunches, wore expensive suits, and talked about synergy without ever lifting a box. He and Madison bought a bigger house in an upscale subdivision. They leased a German SUV for safety. "I can help with the down payment," I had told them when they were house hunting. Ethan had waved me off. "No, Daniel. You did more than enough with the investment. We've got this." What I did not know then was who really had what. The first real crack came 2 years later, at a Sunday dinner at my place. Madison was quieter than usual, picking at her food. 8-year-old Tyler chattered non-stop about soccer, while Ethan scrolled his phone under the table. "How's work, Maddie?" I asked. She hesitated. Ethan looked up sharply. "It's fine," she said quickly. "Just busy." Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders in what might have looked like affection. To me, it looked like pressure. "She's being modest," he said. "Dad's talking about transitioning some responsibilities. It's a big step up." "Transitioning how?" I asked. Ethan laughed. "Come on, Daniel. You don't want to hear corporate talk." But I did. I always wanted to know where the load-bearing walls were before the roof shifted. That night, as I walked them to the car, Madison hugged me a little too tightly and whispered, "I'll come by on Tuesday, Dad. Just you and me." She didn't make it on Tuesday, nor Wednesday. On Thursday, I got a text. "Sorry, Dad, things blew up at work. I'll call soon. Love you." The call did not come. Instead, 3 weeks later came the dinner at the Brooks family house. The dinner I will remember until I die. Charles's home was everything mine was not. Gated driveway, columns, a chandelier in the foyer bigger than my entire dining room. Their house looked like a magazine spread. Perfect furniture, perfect art, perfect coldness. Madison seemed small inside it. "Daniel, glad you could make it," Charles said, clapping me on the back without warmth. "Big family announcement tonight." The dining table was set with crystal and silver. Charles sat at the head. Ethan on his right, Madison beside Ethan. I took a seat opposite my daughter, trying to catch her eye. She avoided my gaze. Her fingers twisted her napkin to shreds in her lap. Halfway through the main course, Charles stood and raised his glass. "To my son," he announced, his voice booming. "Ethan has agreed to take on a new position for the good of the company and for the good of the family." There was scattered applause from the brothers and their wives. I noticed none of them looked truly happy, but they all forced smiles. Ethan got to his feet, doing that modest shrug arrogant men do when they want to appear humble. "Dad and I have been reviewing the structure at Brooks Kitchens," he said. "We realized some positions were, let's say, cosmetic, not really necessary at this level." My stomach went cold. He put a hand on Madison's shoulder. She flinched almost imperceptibly. "Madison has been a wonderful face for our brand," Ethan went on. "But we're moving in a different direction. We'll be outsourcing design work to a firm that can handle multiple regions. Madison will step back, focus on home and Tyler, which is where she belongs, really." Charles laughed. "We all knew this day would come. Boys run businesses, women run homes. Nothing wrong with that. You did your part, Madison." My daughter's eyes filled. She swallowed hard. "You told me I was going to be creative director," she whispered. Ethan leaned down, close enough that only those of us nearest could hear, but the room had gone silent. "I told you what you needed to hear to keep you motivated," he said. "Let's not be dramatic. We'll make sure you get a reasonable settlement. You were never more than a good investment." And Charles, the patriarch, lifted his glass and said, "Smart thinking, son. No point dragging dead weight," to Ethan for having the guts to make tough calls. They laughed. They toasted. My daughter sat there, tears sliding down her cheeks, while her husband and his father celebrated her being discarded like a used blueprint. That was when I stood up. My chair scraped loud against the polished floor. Every eye turned to me. I saw impatience on Ethan's face, annoyance on Charles's, faint embarrassment on Madison's. "Sit down, Dad," Ethan said under his breath. "This is not the time." I looked at my daughter. "Maddie, do you want to leave?" She shook her head automatically, the way someone shakes their head at a gunman and hopes he'll put the weapon away if they cooperate. "Daniel," Charles said, irritation sharpening his tone, "this is a family decision. We appreciate everything you did to help them get started, but the company must grow. Ethan knows what he's doing." I studied the man across from me. Behind him on the wall was a framed photograph of their flagship showroom. I recognized the oak beams. My own firm had consulted on that ceiling. I had helped keep his roof from collapsing, and he was trying to collapse my daughter's life. "You're right," I said slowly. "Ethan does know what he's doing. He and I signed some important documents together after all." Ethan stiffened. Charles's eyes narrowed. "What documents?" Charles asked. Ethan forced a laugh. "He means the original shareholder paperwork. Nothing big." Madison looked between us, confused. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Not here," I said softly. "Not in this house." I met my daughter's gaze and let her see it, the steel that had kept me standing 13 hours a day on construction sites. "Come home with me tonight, Madison." Ethan's voice dropped to a hiss. "She's staying here. This is her home now." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We will see about that." If you had been there, watching your daughter be stripped of her work, her dignity, her future, while men who had never carried a beam in their life laughed, would you have stayed at that table and swallowed it? Or would you, like me, have finally decided the line had been crossed? Madison did come home with me that night. Not because Ethan allowed it, but because she broke down in the guest bathroom and could not stop shaking. We left quietly, while Charles argued with one of his other sons about something to do with expansion. Ethan followed us to the driveway, grabbing her arm. "Do not make a scene," he hissed. "You're embarrassing my family." I stepped between them. I am not as strong as I was at 40, but some lines remain. "Take your hand off my daughter," I said. He dropped her arm, but his eyes burned. "You're ruining everything," he spat. "You think you can bully us with that stupid loan? You're a retired engineer on a fixed income. You should be grateful we let Maddie into the business at all." And that was when a thought slid into place like an I-beam dropped into sockets. He was worried about the loan, which meant he had forgotten something. My lawyer, the clause, the collateral. "Get in the car, Madison," I said. "Now." She obeyed. It had been years since she responded to my voice like that, not since she was a teenager and I'd caught her sneaking out after curfew. I drove her home. She cried most of the way, then fell silent, staring out the window at the dark. Finally she whispered, "He said I don't understand the big picture. That this is just business." "Business?" I repeated. "Dad? Am I stupid?" she asked, her voice so small it cut me like glass. I pulled into my driveway and put the truck in park. "Madison, you are many things. Stubborn, creative, too forgiving for your own good. But you are not stupid. You just believe people you loved would protect you. That is not stupidity. That is trust. They exploited it." She wiped her face. "What can we do?" I looked at the house that Linda and I had built with our own hands. The porch light glowed steady, the same way it had for 35 years. "We," I said, "are going to read some old papers." In the morning, while Madison slept in the spare bedroom wrapped in one of her mother's quilts, I dug out the file box labeled Brooks Investment. The loan agreement sat where I had left it 8 years before. I poured coffee, put on my reading glasses, and opened it line by line. There it was, just as I remembered. If Madison Hart is removed from employment with Brooks Kitchens, Inc., without cause, or if her shares are transferred, diluted, or encumbered without the written consent of the lender, me, gains immediate right to demand repayment in full, secured by Madison's shares and any distributions related to them. And if that repayment is not made within 60 days, the lender has the right to assume ownership of those shares outright. In other words, if they pushed her out and refused to make her whole, her 10% would become mine. At the time we signed, 10% had been a kindness. Now, according to the last public valuation, it was worth a great deal more. 10% of the company's current value could crush their plans if it fell into unfriendly hands. I called Ben Fisher. He picked up on the second ring. "Ben, it's Dan Hart. Remember that Brooks file?" He chuckled softly. "I remember telling you they wouldn't like those terms. I take it they finally stepped on the landmine." "Last night," I said. "They humiliated my daughter in front of their whole family, announced she's being pushed out. No severance details, no timeline. Just done." Ben sighed. "You always did attract drama late in life, Dan. Bring me everything, today." By noon, we were sitting in his cluttered office, papers spread across his desk. "Here's the good news," Ben said, tapping the loan agreement. "Legally, they've already breached this clause if they formalize her removal without your consent and without paying off the loan. And from the way they treated her, I doubt they're planning to buy you out fairly." "And the bad news?" He slid across a different folder. "I looked into the company's current filings this morning. Charles has been aggressive with expansion. Aggressive and sloppy. They are over-leveraged. 3 new showrooms, 2 in markets they do not understand. They're profitable now, but barely. A downturn or a partner pulling out, and they could be in serious trouble." I stared at the numbers. "Could they borrow more to pay me out?" Ben shook his head. "They'd have to convince the bank to extend even further. Unlikely, unless they had a friendly investor." He paused. "Or unless someone bought their debt from the bank and changed the terms." Something in his tone made me look up sharply. "Ben?" "I know a man in Columbus who buys distressed commercial debt," Ben said. Quietly. "For a price. You have assets, Dan. Rental properties, retirement funds, the house. You could leverage some of that. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you could. And if you held their note, well, the power dynamic would shift dramatically." I sat there, an old man in a tired suit, staring at the possibility of war. "Would it destroy them?" I asked. "Handled correctly?" Ben said. "No. It would force them to treat Madison fairly, restructure, maybe sell off a showroom. Badly handled, it could wipe them out. The question is, what do you want?" I thought of Madison at that table, tears on her cheeks, as her husband called her an investment, while his father laughed and lifted his glass. I thought of all the family dinners I'd paid for, the housewarming gifts, the nights I'd babysat Tyler so they could attend charity galas with people who apparently mattered more than their own family. "I want," I said slowly, "for them to understand that writing off my daughter as dead weight has a cost." What would you have done if you opened an old file and realized, in black and white, that the men who humiliated your child had accidentally handed you the detonator for their little empire? Would you have put the papers away, forgiven, and hoped for the best? Or would you have used every clause you had to make sure they never did it to her again? The second phase of my plan began quietly. First, I stopped all help. For years, I had been paying for things in the background. Private school tuition for Tyler, surprise mortgage payments, emergency credit card bills when Ethan's investments went sour. Madison had never asked directly. Ethan had always been the one to call. "Just a short-term cash flow thing, Daniel," he would say. "We're leveraged right now, but this new showroom will put us over the top." This time, when he called, I let the phone buzz until voicemail picked up. The message he left was impatient, then angry. Next, Ben set up a meeting with the regional bank that held most of Brooks Kitchen's debt. I sat in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and toner, across from a loan officer with tired eyes and a tie too tight at the neck. "We'd be open to selling a portion of the note," the officer admitted after Ben laid out the proposal. "Frankly, the Brooks Group has been a bit aggressive. If someone with stable collateral and a conservative repayment plan wants to shoulder some of that risk, our board will not object." Within a month, thanks to a second mortgage on my rental duplex and some careful use of my portfolio, I owned 40% of the loan behind Brooks Kitchens. Not enough to control them outright, but enough to demand a seat at the table when terms were renegotiated. I did not tell Madison. Not yet. She was still fragile, still waking up in the night from dreams where she was trapped in a showroom with no doors. Instead, I encouraged her to see a therapist and gave her the number of a friend who taught design at a local college. "Come guest lecture," my friend had said. "The students will love hearing from someone who's actually worked with clients." In the meantime, Ethan and Charles prepared to formalize her removal. I know this because, arrogance being what it is, they sent Madison a termination letter that read like a slap. "Dear Ms. Hart, as discussed, your services as a design consultant for Brooks Kitchens, Inc. will no longer be required effective 30 days from the date of this letter. No mention of equity, no offer of severance, just closing the door." "Can they do this?" Madison asked me, gripping the paper so hard it crumpled. "No," I said, "not without talking to me." I wrote a letter of my own on Ben's advice. To Charles Brooks and the board of Brooks Kitchens, Inc. As the secured lender associated with the 10% shareholding held in the name of Madison Hart, I do not consent to any transfer, dilution, or encumbrance of said shares, nor to the removal of Madison Hart from employment, without prior negotiation and settlement of the outstanding loan as per Clause 7C. Please consider this a formal notice of potential breach. Sincerely, Daniel Hart. We sent it by certified mail. I almost wished I could have seen Charles's face when he opened it. We did not have to wait long for a response. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Is this Daniel Hart?" a clipped voice asked. "Yes." "This is Charles Brooks. We need to talk." His tone was different now, less casual, more controlled. "About my daughter?" I asked. "About your loan." We agreed to meet at his office the following Monday. Madison heard about it from Ethan. He showed up at my house the night before, uninvited, his jaw tight, eyes wild. "What the hell are you playing at, old man?" he demanded as soon as I opened the door. Tyler, who had been at the kitchen table with his math homework, looked up in alarm. "Language," I said quietly. "There's a child in the room." He pushed past me into the hallway. "You sent my father a letter threatening legal action. You're going to blow up the company over what? Hurt feelings?" I closed the door and followed him into the living room. "I am enforcing a contract you signed, Ethan. No one forced your hand. You signed as witness when Madison took that loan." "She would never have needed your money if you hadn't insisted on that structure," he snapped. "Dad could have just given her the shares." "You wanted my money," I said calmly. "Now you have my terms." He laughed, bitter and harsh. "You think you've got us cornered? You're a retiree sitting in a dark little house. My father built a company. He has lawyers, connections. You're out of your depth." "Do you really want to test how deep I go?" I asked. For a moment, something like fear flickered in his eyes. Then he shook his head, like clearing it. "You're going to regret this," he said. "We all are." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. Tyler peered around the corner. "Grandpa?" "Yes, buddy." "Is Dad mad at you?" I looked at his small face, so much like Madison's at that age. "Yes," I said. "But sometimes people get mad when you stop letting them do the wrong thing." He thought about that. "Are you doing the wrong thing?" I knelt down so we were eye to eye. My knees complained. "I don't know," I said honestly. I'm trying to do the right thing for your mom. That's what I know. The meeting with Charles was at 9 sharp. His office was colder than I remembered, or maybe that was just him. He sat behind his desk, hands steepled. Ethan sat to his left, his expression tight. A company lawyer sat to his right, shuffling papers. "Daniel," Charles said, "we've all had some time to cool down. Let's talk like rational men." "Very well," I said. "We value Madison," he continued smoothly, "but as we explained, the company's needs have changed. We can't justify a full-time in-house designer at her pay grade. We're willing to offer her a small severance and buy back her shares at the original valuation. That settles your loan and keeps everyone whole." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. The number was less than half what her shares were currently worth. "No," I said. Charles blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "No," I repeated. "You are not buying out my loan at a discount while you laugh about writing my daughter off as dead weight." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Hart, there's a risk here to you as well. If relations deteriorate, litigation could drag on for years. Your daughter might not see any money for a long time." "I'm retired," I said. "Time is one thing I have, at least for now. You, on the other hand, have a debt load and expansion projects that won't tolerate uncertainty." Charles's eyes hardened. "What exactly are you implying?" I opened my briefcase and laid out the documents Ben had prepared: my loan agreement, the termination letter, and the confirmation from the bank of my purchase of 40% of their note. "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I am stating facts. You are in breach of this clause if you remove Madison without settling my loan on fair terms. And I am now one of your largest creditors. If I declare you in default, the bank will have to take that seriously." Silence. The lawyer's eyes darted over the papers. Ethan went pale. You bought part of our loan?" he stammered. "Yes," I said. "You told me I was a loser on a fixed income, Ethan. That I should be grateful you let my daughter into your little enterprise. You forgot I spent 40 years building structures worth more than this company. I didn't retire stupid." Charles leaned back slowly. The veins in his neck stood out. "You're willing to tank the company your daughter owns a piece of?" he asked. "If you force me to," I said. "But that isn't my goal. My goal is justice. You will do the following: reinstate Madison as an employee, or, at her choice, terminate her with a severance package equal to 2 years of her salary plus her full pro rata share of the company's current valuation, as determined by an independent auditor. You will treat her with the respect you would afford any male family member in her position, or we go to war." The lawyer swallowed. "That would be highly unusual for a minority shareholder." "So is using a daughter-in-law as free advertising and then throwing her away when you're done," I said. Charles's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "You're bluffing," he said. "You would not risk your own money." I thought of Madison's face at that table. I thought of Linda, who used to say, "Danny, there is nothing more dangerous than a quiet man who has been pushed too far." "Try me," I said. The meeting ended with no agreement, but something had shifted. 2 days later, I got an anonymous text from a number I did not recognize. "Check your daughter's credit reports," it read. They used her SSN. For a long moment, I just stared at the phone. Then I forwarded the message to Ben. Minutes later, he called. "Dan, that text?" he said. "If it's true, this is bigger than a bad severance package." We pulled Madison's credit. There, in black and white, were 3 lines of credit opened in her name, with Brooks Kitchens listed as employer, a business card, a personal card with a high limit, and a revolving line used as collateral on one of the new showrooms. Madison's eyes filled as she stared at the report. "I didn't open these," she whispered. "I never authorized this." "Ethan?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "He once said something about needing my signature for a vendor account. He handed me a stack of papers at home, said it was just housekeeping stuff. I signed where he highlighted. I didn't read the fine print." Ben was quiet for a long moment. This is fraud, he said finally. Identity theft. If they used her creditworthiness without proper disclosure, that's a violation of federal law. This is no longer just civil. What would you have done if you suddenly realized that the same people laughing at your daughter's tears had also quietly turned her into a shield for their debts, using her name and credit like armor while they played with fire? Would you still be thinking about keeping the peace? Or would you start thinking about how to make sure they never had that power over her again? The second hook of this story, if you want to call it that, came not from me, but from the government. Ben made a discreet call to a contact he had in the state's Financial Crimes Division, purely hypothetical. Within a week, there were quiet inquiries being made about Brooks Kitchen's financing practices. At the same time, I moved my own pieces. I visited Tyler's school and spoke with the counselor about family changes. I spoke with Madison's therapist and, with her permission, sat in on a session where we discussed the possibility of separation from Ethan. I went with her to see a family law attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces. Document everything, the attorney said. Every insult, every threat, every financial irregularity. And do not confront them about the credit lines yet. Let investigators do their work. It took 3 months. 3 months of pretending to be more frail than I was when Ethan dropped Tyler off at my house. 3 months of watching Madison slowly stand a little straighter as she realized she was not trapped. In that time, I received 2 furious calls from Charles about unnecessary scrutiny from the bank. Apparently, the bank had decided to review all their facilities in light of my new position as creditor and my expressed concerns. One expansion project was put on hold. Another was forced to downsize. Their cash flow tightened. "You're strangling us," Charles snapped on the last call. "We're family." "Family," I said, "does not call my daughter dead weight." The final act came on a bright Friday morning in late spring. Charles's 60th birthday party was that night, a grand event at a downtown hotel ballroom. There would be investors, bankers, suppliers, the whole ecosystem of Brooks Kitchens. Madison was invited, of course, as the pretty daughter-in-law prop. She chose to attend, not for them, but for herself. "I want them to see me standing," she said, "not hiding." She wore a simple black dress Linda would have approved of, and the necklace Linda had left her in the will. I wore my best suit. Before the party, Ben and I met with the bank's legal team and, more importantly, with a representative from the state's Financial Crimes Unit. Investigations had confirmed irregularities in how certain credit lines had been opened, as well as concerning discrepancies in disclosures to some minority shareholders, not just Madison. "We're not here to shut them down tonight," the investigator said, "but we are here to send a message. Mr. Hart, are you sure you want to do this publicly?" I thought of Ethan's words, the laughter, the toast. Then I thought of Tyler, who deserved to grow up knowing that actions have consequences. "Yes," I said, "I am sure." The ballroom was already buzzing when we arrived. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, trays of champagne. A banner read, "Happy 65th, Charles," in elegant gold script. Charles stood near the stage, shaking hands, basking in admiration. Ethan hovered beside him, flawless in his tailored suit. When they saw us, their smiles faltered. "Daniel," Charles said, forcing cheer into his voice, "glad you could join us." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. Madison stayed close to me. Several of the employees she had worked with came over quietly to hug her, murmuring that they missed her in the showroom. She smiled, a little shy, but I saw her shoulders relax. After dinner, someone tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" Ethan took the stage, grinning. "It's my honor to say a few words about my father, the man who built this company from nothing," he began. He launched into a speech about hard work, vision, family values. I listened, jaw tight. Madison's hand found my arm under the table and gripped it. "And finally," Ethan said, raising his glass toward his father, "here's to another decade of growth, of smart decisions, of leaving dead weight behind, and charging into the future." The words were almost identical to those he had used about my daughter. The room laughed and applauded. Charles beamed. That was my cue. I stood. "May I?" I called out, projecting my voice like I had on job sites across noisy steel skeletons. "I would like to say a few words as well." The room quieted. Ethan's smile tightened. "Now's not really." But Charles, bloated with champagne and self-importance, waved magnanimously. "Let the old man speak. He helped get us here after all." How right he was. I walked to the stage slowly, feeling every one of my 68 years and every one of my 40 years of experience. I took the microphone. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Daniel Hart. Some of you know me as Madison's father. Some of you know me as the man who invested his life savings so that his daughter and her husband could buy into this fine company." Polite chuckles. A few nods. "I was proud of that," I continued. "Proud of this family. Proud of the work my daughter did as the face of Brooks Kitchens. Proud of the designs many of you saw in magazines." I paused, let my gaze sweep the room. I saw discomfort in a few eyes already. "But a few months ago, I sat at a dinner not unlike this one," I said. "At that dinner, my son-in-law informed my daughter in front of his father and their family that she was no longer needed, that she had been a good investment while she lasted." His father lifted his glass and laughed. A murmur went through the room. Ethan's face darkened. Charles shifted uneasily. "I watched my child cry while these men celebrated," I said, "and I realized something. Bridges collapse when the weight on them is more than they were built to bear. Families collapse for the same reason." The bank's representative and the investigator slipped quietly into the side of the room. Ben stood near them, calm. "So I did what any engineer would do," I went on. "I checked the load-bearing structures. I read the contracts. I examined the foundations of this company." I lifted a folder from the lectern. It held nothing but my own speech notes, but the symbolism mattered. "And what I found," I said, "was that the same people laughing at my daughter's tears had also placed her name on debts she never agreed to, had used her credit without her informed consent, had attempted to strip her of the shares she bought with my money in direct violation of the agreements they signed." The murmur turned into a low roar. "That," I said quietly, "is called fraud." The investigator stepped forward then, flanked by two colleagues. "Mr. Brooks," he called across the crowded ballroom, his voice carrying in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "I'm Investigator Reynolds with the State Financial Crimes Division. We have some questions about your company's recent financing activities." The room went dead silent. Charles's face drained of color. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "We're in the middle of a private celebration." "I understand," Reynolds said politely. "You're welcome to speak with us in a private room, but we will be speaking tonight." Ethan rounded on me, eyes blazing. "You did this," he whispered, voice trembling. "Yes," I said. "I did." He lunged toward me, but two of his own brothers caught him, murmuring for him to calm down as phones came out all around the room, recording. Investors conferred in low, urgent voices. The bank representative, pale but composed, approached Reynolds. "Investigator," he said, "our institution has also been reviewing our exposure with Brooks Kitchens. We would appreciate being included in whatever discussion you're about to have." Charles looked around at the faces that had been smiling at him minutes before. Now those faces were wary, calculating, some openly judgmental. Madison stood beside our table, shoulders squared, Tyler's small hand in hers. She wasn't crying. Later, much later, the details would sort themselves out. There would be audits, negotiations, legal settlements. Because of the fraud findings, Madison had leverage in her divorce case. Ethan's attempt to use her credit without proper authorization became a powerful factor. The bank refused to extend further credit to the company without significant restructuring. Charles was forced to sell 2 showrooms and step down as CEO for health reasons, leaving one of the more responsible sons in charge. As for my loan, it was paid in full, at the current valuation, not the insultingly low one they had offered. Madison received her share as cash and a smaller, clean equity stake in the restructured company, along with a written apology drafted by their legal team and approved by ours. She chose not to return to work there. Instead, she took a teaching position, then opened a small, independent design studio with 2 friends. People came, drawn by the story they had read in the paper about a woman who stood up to her powerful in-laws. Ethan took a plea deal on a lesser charge, but the plea still came with probation, a fine, and a permanent mark on his record. His days of easy credit and guaranteed deals were over. Charles, I hear, spends his days complaining about ungrateful children and meddling old men. I sleep fine. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Tyler is asleep in the next room on the nights he stays with me, I replay that evening in my head, the glittering ballroom, the moment the laughter died. The look on Ethan's face when he realized the loser he mocked had quietly become the man holding the floor under his feet. Did I go too far? Maybe. There are times I wonder if a quieter approach would have spared Madison some public attention. But then I remember her at that first dinner, shoulders shaking, while the men in her life toasted her removal like a business victory. I am an old man. I do not have many battles left in me. But this one I would fight again. So I am asking you, was I right to stand up and make my son-in-law and his father regret everything they had done? Or should I have swallowed the insult, kept the peace, and let them walk away believing that women and old men are just good investments until they are not needed anymore?
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.